Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dojo Live this Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022. And for those of you with Mexican heritage, happy Day of the Dead. So it's my pleasure to introduce a really exciting series that we've got going on the show, and that's all about AWS, Amazon Web Services. Today is the first of 4. So every other Wednesday, this next couple weeks, join us for this special series. And joining me to talk all about it, I'm very, very happy to introduce, where's their photos here? We'll see. They are on camera. There they are. Perfect. Art Chan, who is the Senior Partner Solutions Architect with Amazon Web Services. Hi, Art.
Hello.
Hey, and Jose Murillo joining us from Ancora and Costa Rica. He is a DevOps engineer. Hey, Jose.
Hello.
So we're very, very international today. We've got Mexico, Costa Rica, and of course, the United States. They're the Bay Area. So what are we talking about today? It's all about how right now is the right time to migrate to the cloud. But before we get to that, I would really like to get to know the two of you just a bit better. We'll kick it off with you, Art. If you could talk a bit about your background, your passions, and sort of how that's led to your time with AWS. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Art Chan. I'm a Senior Partner Management Solutions Architect here with AWS. I've been in the technology industry for over 25 years. I've done everything from software engineering, IT organizations. I've developed pro-serve organizations, both pre-sales and post-sales organizations. I've taken these roles not only here in the US, but built a team out in Hong Kong in the Asia-Pac region, covering everything from Beijing as the north of my region and Melbourne at the south of my region. Back in the US, I've started a data analytics company in my past, ran that for about a dozen years. And I find that a company like Amazon is even better than that. So here I am. Love everything technology and IT and services.
Perfect. What an amazing journey and story that you have. Truly international. And I have to say, you do not look old enough to have accomplished everything that you have accomplished. So you age well. As we say here in Spanish, traga años, like a year swallower. Sounds like something you'd find in like Harry Potter or something, right?
I've got the soft focus camera lens on, so
Yeah.
to erase some of the lines.
Own it. Perfect. And Josue, let's hear a bit of your story. I'd like to get to know you a bit better.
Right. So my name is Josue Murillo. I'm from Costa Rica, from a small country in Central America, for those that may have difficulty finding it. So I've been working on IT for, I don't know, about 9 years, I believe. And I'm a senior DevOps here at Ancora. And I've been doing things on the cloud and DevOps side for a while now, right? I started as a developer and then found out that AWS or cloud services in general were my passion, right? So got certified, start studying, doing projects. When in a blink of an eye, I was already doing designs and architecture and a lot of fun stuff on AWS. Apart from that, what I do usually involves designing, architecture, DevOps work, right, creating pipelines and all those things. And the main focus today, right, migrations. I've done quite a few. One of the first things that I did on AWS was a migration, a small scale, but a migration nonetheless. And yeah, I love everything that has to do with cloud technologies, with DevOps technologies, and well, helping people get to where they want to be in terms of their services and applications.
Awesome. We've got two powerhouses with us here on Dojo Live today. I'm really excited to get into it. So like I said, the topic of today's show is how right now is the right time to migrate to the cloud. And we're really going to try to focus on how cloud migration can bring certainty to uncertain times. And of course, what some of those business values are. I think Jose touched on that to doing so, and how to get started. So as we do kick off today, let's talk a little bit about that uncertainty, right? We're in Q4, which means most companies are doing a lot of their 2023 planning. And so to kick off the show, I really wanted to just bring up this pervasive sense of uncertainty that I think we all kind of are feeling. And given the current economic conditions and even geopolitical instability that's happening, I imagine, right? I'm not a business leader myself, but I do imagine that a lot of leaders are feeling even more uncertain than they usually do at this time of year. How have you guys maybe seen this playing out?
Absolutely. I mean, this is essentially forecasting the weather for next year, right? We can't do it. It's just one of the things that a lot of CIOs are having challenges, and organizations are having challenge trying to figure out how to grow. So with technology, as you guys all know, you have to plan for maximum capacity. If you ask a CIO, is your board, is your executives going to be growing or shrinking in 12 to 18 months? Many people don't know. These are 5-year commitments oftentimes that you make when you build out infrastructure. So, over the course of the 5 years, you have to figure what's my maximum utilization. That's what I'm going to buy, and that's what I'm going to build. And however, not being able to answer those questions is causing a lot of headaches for CIOs, because they say, well, how do I grow or how do I shrink? And either of those two are not tenable for current day planning for what's going to happen in the next quarter, next half year, or next year.
Yeah. Jose,
Right.
have you seen anything different? Are you getting that same sense from?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and some things come as a surprise for people, right? You have your service that you are comfortable working on, right? You have your on-premise thing, and you don't want to move because you don't know what's gonna happen next, right? Sometimes that kind of analysis paralysis right there, right? But then something comes, something unexpected, like in a couple of years that has passed, where something hits the world, and then suddenly everyone is working from home, right? So
Mhm.
suddenly your application that wasn't, let's say, that hot in the market becomes hot out of the sudden, right? So how do you respond to that? You're not prepared for that. And we saw during these periods some companies that were not able to handle it, right?
Yeah, or the opposite, I guess, of suddenly your product
Yes,
isn't a hot market anymore. Yeah.
correct. And how do you deal with that, right? There are costs associated, a lot of logistic issues and such, and it all comes from uncertainty. And as you said, right, geopolitical uncertainty, and well, we had a pandemic recently, right, that changed the
Mhm.
rules. So you have to be able to adapt and see how to handle it. Yeah.
Exactly. So this uncertainty, am I expanding? Am I shrinking? And I think talking about the pandemic that you brought up and the fallout of that, right, is this issue that I think we can all feel to one degree or another, and that is
Yeah.
the supply chain, right? Supply chain. Maybe it's just me not being able to find my favorite mayonnaise or something silly like that, but I imagine that this has also impacted tech companies' abilities to execute on what you mentioned, Art, the infrastructure. So
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
infrastructure in particular, how is cloud migration a solution for this?
Well, just to kind of take a step back and talk about that supply chain issue that you brought up, I'm seeing issues all across the board. Just getting server components, peripherals, network equipment. It is very challenging, if not impossible, in many cases, in many places, to procure what you need to do a complete build out. So not only do you have, maybe half of your components that you've already procured that are depreciating, you don't have the other half, and you can't even get utility out of what you've purchased. So it's a big,
Literally collecting dust.
literally collecting dust. So what are organizations going to do? So one of the solutions for some of the best practice companies that have executed very well is to move workloads to the cloud. Not because I work for AWS, but even before I worked for AWS, I've come to the realization that moving my own workloads to the cloud would be more beneficial from agility, from elasticity, being able to focus on the innovation that I'm good at, and be able to get redundancy and go global at any given time, instead of having to procure equipment and secure facilities and then have bodies on the ground in order to execute on that.
Focus on the thing that you're selling, or service that you're giving, right? Infrastructure
Yeah,
should
that's
not
right.
be one of the things that you have to I don't know, go through meetings every day just to figure out where to get the hardware that you need. It's
Right.
not.
And
Yeah.
and supply chain's only half the problem. The other half of the problem is IT people are just hard to get, period.
Yeah.
Costs have been astronomical. The number of companies have been competing for the same talent pool and poaching left and right. And the reality is, organizations don't need to keep managing undifferentiated workloads. So patching operating systems, making sure your service is updated, a lot of that is not necessary for most organizations. Leave the heavy lifting and the commodity work to the cloud platforms and focus on what you're good at, just as you said.
Yeah, and I think even, I mean, the peace of mind, I think also, not just like the business components and the ease, but even just the peace of mind to have flexibility, to be able to react in a way that is, most adequate for whatever happens to be happening in any given time. And I think the peace of mind of allowing somebody else to, in a lot of ways, assume the risk, I think is extremely, extremely valuable, I think, as a business owner.
Well, it's not just the risk factor, but it's also security. I mean, I've set up infrastructure before, and I'll tell you that, 10, you give 10 IT guys, they'll implement things 10 different ways. 9 of them will have security holes. And how do you protect against that, right? So, short of doing a full audit, a cloud offers a lot of a good alternative to that, because Amazon secures everything at the cloud infrastructure. So everything from the host operating system down is secured and audited. Everything above that is no different than if you were to deploy your workloads in an on-prem scenario where you would have to secure it anyway. But you take the heavy lift of everything below that operating system line and let AWS handle that.
And you go one step further, right? I mean, you migrate to the cloud and you have your services in there, and there are tools native for AWS that will analyze what you have and let you know that maybe you're doing something wrong, maybe you're doing things right, and what you should be doing, right? It's different from having
Correct.
your things on prem, right, and have your IT people that do things differently. They having someone to help come and audit your thing and see what is going on. That takes a lot of time. If you go to AWS, for example, there are automated tools with artificial intelligence and everything that will let you know, hey, you should do something about this, and here how do you solve it, and you do it in a
Mm.
couple of minutes, right?
So it sounds like it's a lot easier, obviously, like after the fact. Like, okay, this makes sense. But like, how do I even get to that point? If it sounds complicated, or maybe you have, just this, if you want it done right, do it yourself kind of mentality. So what are some of the misconceptions, or maybe if they are misconceptions or perceived hurdles of even getting to that point, or the risks that companies might be having in their minds of before making even the switch to go to the cloud?
So there's obviously there's analysis paralysis, right? A lot of people overthink this and believe that it's more complicated than it is. Moving to the cloud could be as easy as a initial stage of doing an assessment. We like to break typical migration into 3 different categories. So there's the assessment phase. There's a phase where we do what we call mobilize. So that includes understanding your governance and how you're going to take your workloads through. It's more of a planning phase. And then the final phase is a migration and modernization. Now, I say migration and modernization because a lot of folks might want to migrate their workloads into the cloud in what we call, and the industry calls, a lift and shift, meaning that everything sits in somewhat the same architecture as what's in current state. The difference is it's running in the cloud. Now, that gets the customer some value, but the ultimate value is when that workload gets modernized. Now, that doesn't have to happen right away. That could be an additional phase down the line, but it's worth talking to somebody who understands what a modern architecture looks like and being able to consult on that. And I think that's where the combination of AWS and an organization like Encora can help be able to provide that consultative service, being able to provide best practices around some of those governance issues, and be able to educate the customer on future architectures.
Right. I mean, this on this analysis part, right? The planning part. In the end, it is reduced to the right tool for the job, right? you need to see what your we need to see what your infrastructure is and what data you're trying to migrate, right? Because it is not the same thing as migrating, I mean, multiple applications with small databases or terabytes of data, right? Petabytes of data. It requires different strategies. However, everything has a solution, right? It's just a matter of picking the right tool. And then you come to find out that, I mean, there are certain things that companies will ask right away, right? What about moving my data securely, right? That's one of the concerns and things that people might have a misconception where I have to move a lot of data that is sensible. How do I do it? So for that, there are services that we can use or solutions that we can use in tandem with AWS, right? Database migration services, application migration services are two of the services that are used. Direct Connect or VPNs to securely transfer things. Things are encrypted securely and moved on an efficient manner. And then let's say you don't want to do it through the network, right? You don't want to do it through the internet because for some reason, let's say you don't trust the security part of that, or maybe it is not efficiently to consume your data center networking bandwidth to do this. You don't have sufficient. So you may do something like other services that can migrate physically, right? Where AWS like a Snowball, right? Where AWS provides hardware so you can migrate it physically from your data center to the other part, which has considerations and preparation is needed, right? For example, if we're gonna migrate it through the network, there is some analysis that has to be done so you can continue your labor, your service can continue to operate, even though I mean, on top of what we're gonna do through your networking transferring right to the AWS.
Yeah, and then you touched on a good point about tools. There's a lot of tools, and many of them free, that come on AWS to help migration. We have a migration hub, which can help you track all the different components of your migration. We have an application discovery service and application migration service. They both work in tandem and help you with the migration of specific workloads. There's a service catalog where you can create a catalog of IT services that are approved for use. So if as part of your governance program, you want to only allow certain things to run on AWS, you can use a service catalog. And we have our database migration service, or DMS. Now this will take an existing schema, read, and it'll even take the data from an existing legacy database and migrate that to an open source database running on AWS, like Postgres or MySQL.
Right, and then the you touched something important, right? The free tiers or free services. Most of these solutions are free, right? It doesn't cost much. The only thing that has a cost is whatever this data will end up, right? In the end, there are strategies to minimize costs and do it efficiently. But yeah.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, let's talk about, the CIOs or the companies, the businesses who maybe are interested in something like this. Should everyone be on the cloud? Is now the right time? If you don't do this, are you behind? Is there how do you know when this is the best option for you? Like, let's say even smaller businesses, like, oh, we're too small, we don't need that. Is that the optimal time? Or let's talk about some of that stuff that comes into decision making.
So the answer is yes. In short, it's always a good time to look at your different options. And with cloud and the pay-as-you-go model, it makes a lot of sense for a lot of companies. And there's a lot of obvious business reasons. It's for the same reason why airlines don't own their own airplanes and they do commercial leases. Any company that has technology like a data center makes sense to purchase this on a pay-as-you-go model. Amortization on purchased capital hardware is over a number of years, oftentimes 5 or plus more years, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense for most businesses from both a cash flow and an accounting perspective. So moving from a CapEx to an OpEx model has a lot of benefits for organizations. We have organizations within AWS that can help a customer with that calculation. but ultimately, it's worth a CIO's time to at least look at it.
And you mentioned something, right? Even if it is small, I mean, I will argue that the small companies could very well use the migration, very well do the migration because of the costs, right? Because I mean, you will pay as you go, as Art said, and as well you can tailor what you have to a specific degree where you only pay for what you exactly need, right? And then it
Right.
can dynamically respond if you ever get to grow or if you want to grow.
Yeah,
And
which
the
kind of
cloud,
brings us full circle to what we talked about earlier with uncertainty and elasticity.
Right.
right. And for small companies, that's even more prevalent because small companies can, if you grow exponentially, how do you respond to that with on-prem? You
Yeah.
can't, right? If your features and your technology set changes, how do you test new architectures? With the cloud, you could test a new architecture. You could spin up hundreds or thousands of servers or compute components in minutes. And if you don't like it and it doesn't perform the way you thought it would, turn it off, and you don't have to pay for it anymore. So it's a lot. It's a paradigm shift on how you think about developing technology.
Right. And even when you talk about the storage, right? Sometimes you need to keep things on your servers just because there is an audit coming or something like that, right? Data that you don't no longer need or do not need it at this time, right? It is more expensive to have it on your server than have it on, let's say, an S3 bucket with infrequent access or a more down the line
A
thing,
cheaper
right?
tier, right?
Yeah, correct. So,
Gets down to the fractions of pennies per gigabyte. So it's in some cases it makes sense to store all your data, but it doesn't on-prem when you think about the maintenance cost of hard drives and replacement and the mean time before failure rates on most drives. It's
and a backup for a backup, right? You have a backup in case something breaks, and you have a backup for a backup, and then that goes exponentially, right? If you do it if you migrate to the cloud, these backups and all the storage comes at a way lower cost, right? I mean, I think if we talk about one of the biggest benefits, in my opinion, other than modernization, right, of your application, disaster recovery, high availability, and all this that comes that it is a pain on premises, is costs. You will save a lot by moving for sure. It will take some planning at the beginning, which is one of the best practices, right? You plan ahead first, and you find people like us that we have done it before a million times. We have faced a lot of different applications, legacy or not, even modern ones that want to migrate. And the thing at the end is painless. It will save you money, and you will see better service, basically.
Yeah, and I think that brings me to sort of we're actually in the final minutes of the show. And so maybe this is the final question. But you mentioned people like us, Josue and Cora, or Art, directly with AWS. Let's say we've done our job well today and we've convinced the CIOs out there who might be watching the show that yes, it's time, I'm going to migrate to the cloud. What are some of the factors maybe to take into mind to decide whether to kind of utilize their own in-house teams or to use a trusted third party? Like, what are the pros and cons of each of these? Or is there if this is you, then do this, or if this is you, then do that? Kind of, how can we maybe help people in that form of making a decision?
Yeah, so that's a very good question and a very common question. So and unfortunately the answer is it depends, right? Some of it is the goals of the organization. How quickly do you want to get there? Because moving from an on-prem to a cloud, even though some of the technologies are very analogous and very similar, in fact, AWS runs a lot of managed open source solutions as well. So many technology people are familiar with it. The answer is probably to do an assessment. Let's take a look at what you have to migrate. Let's come up with a plan. Let's look at your staffing and your capabilities internally. It may be the case that the existing staff is perfectly sufficient to handle a migration. However, in most cases, there are issues like permissions and governance that come into play. And to dive into technology just for a little bit, on Unix hosts, you've got user accounts that manage services that are running in a multi-user operating system. Now, the difference in cloud is those services can span multiple users and services. The idea behind some of the permissions in the cloud is you can actually control that to a granular level, not just to a host, but you can control what user has what access to which service. You can even give services permissions to access other data. For example, if you have data sitting in an S3 bucket, you might want this container to only be able to access it. So there's different controls, and some of the governance around that needs to be discussed ahead of time and thought of ahead of time before jumping in the cloud. But that doesn't stop an organization from experimenting. One of our leadership principles is to learn and be curious at Amazon, and we encourage our customers and our partners to do the same. We have free tiers for probably most of our services, and technical people from customer organizations, they should be welcome to try it out. I mean, there's no commitment on that side where they can test the services out and see if it works for them.
Yeah, pay as you go, put in a budget alarm so you don't go over whatever budget you have assigned to a POC, and then you can experiment and do your thing, right? I mean, to second what Art said, in my experience, I mean, if you already have things on-prem, right, and you have work on-prem and your IT team works on-prem, it will take a while, even though there are services that these people may be accustomed to, because I mean, Linux on EC2 machines, Linux on a premise, right? Some difference there, but it's still Linux. It will take a while to them to get accustomed to, but they can get there. We at Encora, for example, we have people that have done this before and are experts on AWS, right? And we know what it takes and know each service to the detail, right? And then in the end, it's a collaboration effort, right? You have your people that know your application, that know your infrastructure, what it takes. We have our people that know AWS, and we can do a collaboration to get you there. For example, if you talk about networking, right? What do you need in terms of networking? Because you already have it set up on premise. Do you want something similar? And what can you expect if you try to replicate it directly, right?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just say it really does come back to the elasticity that this offers in uncertainty and the ability to kind of play around, have fun, try things out, and it's a really beautiful sentiment in terms of technology.
Right, you will save time and cost, however, when you
which ultimately is what businesses want.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and when you get to AWS and know the tool from head to toe, right?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we've actually come to the end of our segment today, the first of 4 again. This is going to be really exciting. So if you liked what you heard today and you want to know more about AWS and this entire process, join us. The next segment series will be on November 16th, next 2 Wednesdays from now. So be sure to catch that. Thank you, Art. Thank you, Josue, for sharing your knowledge with us. Hang on just a moment as we go off air. But before we do, I would like to introduce tomorrow's show. We do have our final show of the week, and that's going to be with Joe Buffon, who is the co-founder and CEO at Annexus Health, talking about digital connectivity and the patient access journey, answering the question of how can healthcare provider organizations and life science companies leverage digital solutions and tech-enabled services to improve what? Access, speed, and adherence to critical care, of course, for more patients. So don't miss it tomorrow right here in Dojo Live at 10 o'clock Pacific. Thank you, everyone. Until then, stay safe.